Join ForumIAS Academy, trusted by hundreds of toppers, including IAS Rank 1 𝐂𝐡𝐚𝐧𝐧𝐞𝐥 Sharma.
Hello and welcome to ForumIAS. Today is 15th September 2023. This is 𝐂𝐡𝐚𝐬𝐜𝐫𝐢𝐻 here, coming to you with important articles from today's newspaper. Let's go to the first article. The first article is about disentangling 2030 global renewable energy target. In this article, we are going to discuss what is the renewable energy target for the world as a whole for the year 2030 and what does it mean for individual countries. Especially, we will see within the context of developed countries and developing countries. Let us go to the article. So, the 28th Conference of Parties, which is the COP28, Conference of Parties to which convention? That is the UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So, for the UNFCCC, 28th Conference of Parties is going to take place in Dubai by the end of this year, and in this particular COP, the Conference of Parties, the president of this conference, he has called for a global target of tripling renewable energy capacity from current levels by 2030. Even in G20, the recent New Delhi declaration, something on these lines was reiterated. So we will see more about this. This is the reason why an editorial has come in today's newspaper on this topic. So, if we have to triple the renewable energy capacity, we have to understand what is the current capacity, what is the percentage of renewables, what is the percentage of non-renewables, that we need to see. So, in 2021, if we take that year as the baseline, the renewable energy source installed capacity was 3026 gigawatt and total installed capacity in that the renewable installed capacity covered 39%. So this 3026 gigawatt is 39%, which means the rest of it are non-renewable sources. This is the installed capacity, but there might be infrastructure to generate electricity from renewable sources. But we know that renewable sources are not all weather, meaning if we take wind energy, wind flows for certain number of days, and particularly the wind speed is high during seasons like monsoon, for example, right? So, solar energy is also seasonal because in the northern hemisphere in winter, solar energy could be very rarely harvested in the higher latitudes. That is why the total electricity generation is only 28%. So 39% is the installed capacity, 28% is the actual amount of generation. So in this particular renewable energy, within the renewable energy, what are all the sources? Hydropower was the highest, followed by solar energy, then wind energy. So these are the top three sources, that is hydropower, wind and solar. First place is for hydropower, second place is for wind, and third only is solar energy. So if we combine these three sources alone, they form 10% of overall energy distribution. Okay, these numbers are not important, but just have a rough idea that number one renewable energy is hydropower, next to that is wind energy, and then in third place we have solar energy. So the current installed capacity is 3026 gigawatt, And by 2030, if we want to triple this capacity, it means nearly we have to reach 9,000 gigawatt, which means there is an additional 6,000 gigawatt of capacity that needs to be installed between the years 2022 and 2030. And out of this 6,000 gigawatt, majority of it must come from solar and wind only, because in hydropower, the time taken to construct a hydropower plant is much more longer than this 8-year span. So, majority of this 6,000 gigawatt additional capacity will come from solar and wind energy. Another thing we have to look at is the growing electricity demand. On one hand, we are thinking of tripling the renewable capacity. Will that be commensurate? Will that be alright in the context of global growing electricity demand? We will see. So, global electricity demand is at the pre-COVID level. So, that is 2.6% average growth rate, right? So, if it grows at this 2.6% average growth rate each year between 2022 and 2030, that means the target of tripling renewable energy, if it is achieved, and the demand is also growing at 2.6% on an average over this 8-year period, at the end of this 8-year period, that is in 2030, 38% of global energy production will come from renewable energy sources. Okay. See, we started out at 39% capacity, and even in 2030, it will be 38% of global electricity production only, because the demand is also growing year on year. So now we have to discuss about the regional differentiation. This electricity demand, the growth we saw in the previous slide, this demand will come mostly from the developing countries. For example, we take the period 2010 to 2019, China and India, the electricity consumption, it grew at 6.6% in China and 6.3% in India respectively. So in this period, the average demand rise has been at 6% roughly for India and China. But if we see the European Union, it was 0.3% decline and only 0.12% growth of demand for electricity in the United States. So in the future, that is in the 8 years till we reach 2030, most of the demand is going to come from developing countries, that is China and India. And even now, the electricity demand is in negative for EU and it is a measly 0.12% for United States. So, what contribution will be made by US and EU in the process of energy transition? We have this lofty goal, right? We want to triple the energy. So, we have to produce this 6,000 gigawatt of energy, right? The 6,000 gigawatt of energy has to be produced. So, how will EU and US contribute to achieving this target? Let us take a scenario wherein all the fossil fuel based electricity, that is coal based power, oil based power, if all the fossil fuel based electricity production is phased out in US and EU, then the US has to install almost 1,500 gigawatt in the 8 years from 2022 to 2030, and the EU has to install 538 gigawatt in the 8 years from 2022 to 2030. But if the US is not phasing out its existing fossil fuel capacity, it needs only 26 gigawatt of renewable energy capacity to meet its demand. If US is doing that, then out of that 6,000 gigawatt, that additional capacity that needs to be added, US's contribution will be only 0.4%, which is not equitable, right? So the ideal scenario is when US and EU, they entirely phase out their fossil fuel based electricity and they deploy that replacement with renewable sources. So if that happens, then what will happen? There will be a positive shift in the burden that is taken on by the developed versus developing countries. How? The US and the EU, they would account for more than a third of new capacity. Out of the 6,000 gigawatt, 1,500 gigawatt will come from US and 538 will come from EU, which means totally they will together install 2,000 gigawatt, which is 1/3 of this figure. Okay, so if US and EU has to contribute this much, what does it mean? They have to phase out their fossil fuel based electricity entirely. If 1/3 of capacity is added by US and EU, it will be easier on the developing countries. The burden does not disproportionately fall on the developing countries. So how did this 9,000 gigawatt target come to surface? The total energy capacity, renewable energy capacity must be 9,000 gigawatt by 2030, right? If we have to achieve this target, we have to add 6,000 gigawatt of additional power, right? That is very clear. Huh? So where did this come from? It comes from a report by IRENA, that is the International Renewable Energy Agency. So in this report only, this lofty target was first proposed. But this IRENA report says that in order to achieve this much of additional capacity, most of the capacity will be added by the developing countries and not the developed countries. For that, this report is giving an example. By 2030, 80% of power generation capacity in sub-Saharan Africa would be from renewable energy. But in EU, it will be only 70%. You see the difference. The level of development in sub-Saharan Africa is miles below EU. But still they are surpassing the renewable energy capacity of the EU. Right? That is why the IRENA report says that majority of this target will be achieved, will be added by the developing countries and not the developed countries. So even China and India are doing a lot. In the G20 meeting, our Prime Minister said that we will touch the 500 gigawatt of renewable capacity by 2030. So India is doing its part, right? But at the same time, what happens is if 500 gigawatt is coming from renewable source, it is a non-reliable source. Why? Because solar energy, wind energy, they are very seasonal. In order to match the unpredictability of renewables, we have to also add non-renewable capacity. Why? For stability of supply. That part is also there. When India is converting almost 40% of its energy mix to renewable energy, that means the national grid also should be equipped to that. And if we are producing massive amount of renewable energy, we must also have the capacity to store that energy. All these are the peripheral things that are often ignored, and this also has to be considered when we are entrusting developing countries with the very huge mandate of adding almost 500 gigawatt of renewable power. So these are all the downsides to that. And for that purpose, the developing countries will need enormous amount of fund. So for US and the EU, they haven't committed properly. They haven't said in writing, they haven't committed in any conventions that they will improve their renewable energy installed capacity. So if at all in the COP28, if this target is getting adopted, India should ensure that US and EU are also pulling their fair share. They are also adding significant amount of renewable energy capacity. then only there will be climate equitability. Okay, so that is it for the first article. The second article is about registration of births and deaths, and that is going to happen digitally from October 1st of this year. And this is made possible through a recent amendment, that is the Registration of Births and Deaths Amendment Act. And this amendment has paved way for digital birth certificates. So this digital birth certificate will be a single document, and that will be used for admission into educational institutions, applications for driving license, government jobs, passport or Aadhaar, voter enrollment, registration of marriage, and all other purposes. This digital birth certificate will be used as a proof of identity. So, if the birth and death data is captured by a centralized digital database, this database will also update the National Population Register. It will also update the ration cards, property registration, and also electoral rolls. So going forward, a person need not enroll themselves into the electoral rolls. Rather, due to the digital registration of births, this data will automatically populate the data in other databases like the National Population Register. So this National Population Register, what is it? It was first compiled in 2010, and from which act does the power emanate from? Which act gives the power to the central government to create a National Population Register? It is the Citizenship Act. I'll write here the Citizenship Act. This act gives the power to create a National Population Register. And this NPR, it was first compiled in 2010 and it was updated in 2015 through a door-to-door enumeration. And in this particular NPR, it already has a database of nearly 119 crore residents. So this NPR, it is the first step to create a National Register of Citizens, and this NRC is also mandated by the Citizenship Act. So what is the role of the states in this process of registration of birth and death? What happens is, the states are mandated to register the births and deaths on the Centre Civil Registration System. So the states will share the data with the Registrar General of India. RGI means the Registrar General of India. Registrar General of India. He is the topmost authority with respect to the civil registration system, the database of birth and death. So the data will be shared by the states to the Registrar General of India. Also, whenever a birth is registered, this particular Registration of Births and Deaths Amendment Act, this act, it authorizes the collection of Aadhaar number of parents and the informant if available. So what is the crux of the matter here? Hereafter, the birth and death data will be registered in a digital database, and this database will be used to populate other databases. And in this, the states have a responsibility to share the data with the Registrar General of India. So that is it for the second article. We'll move on to the third article. This article is about PMMSY, that is the Pradhan Mantri Matsya Sampada Yojana. So there has been nearly 3 years since this particular scheme was launched. So in mains, there is a chance of this scheme being asked. Evaluate the performance of this scheme. That sort of a question can come. So originally, the Pradhan Mantri Matsya Sampada Yojana It was conceived in 2020 as a part of the Atmanirbhar Bharat package, and a total of 20,050 crore was allocated for this scheme. And as a result, a fisheries ministry was also created only in the recent past. This PMMSY, it plugs the gaps in all the phases of fish manufacture. That is, right from fish production, the productivity in a particular area, quality to technology, post-harvest infrastructure and marketing. The entire life cycle of fisheries is taken care of, right from the production till marketing, and support is provided by this PMMSY. So this PMMSY, it identified certain strategic priority areas. What are those priority areas? Marine fisheries, inland fisheries, fishermen's welfare, infrastructure and post-harvest management like cold storage system for fishes, cold water fisheries, ornamental fisheries, aquatic health management, seaweed cultivation. All these are the strategic priority areas as part of the Pradhan Mantri Matsya Sampada Yojana. So this scheme also helped in expanding fisheries to non-traditional areas. Best example is the landlocked Haryana and Rajasthan. In these two states, almost 20,000 hectares of fresh pond area has been created, and this 20,000 hectares was sourced from where? From the saline wastelands. Today, this 20,000 hectares of land is now fresh pond area from which there is aquaculture happening, and that shows that this particular scheme has expanded fisheries to non-traditional areas. Also, this scheme has empowered fisherwomen. How? They will explore remunerative options and alternative livelihoods, like for example, ornamental fisheries, pearl culture and seaweed cultivation. So fisherwomen are also empowered in order to improve the income generation capacity of fishermen and fisherwomen. So a best example is the recently launched 127 crore rupees worth seaweed park in Tamil Nadu's Ramnathpuram district. This is a truly pioneering step in the direction of development of fisheries sector. So India is one of the top 3 countries in fish and aquaculture production. India is the biggest exporter of shrimp in the world. Also, in the recent budget, a new sub-scheme of this Pradhan Mantri Matsya Sampada Yojana was announced with an allocation of 6,000 crore. So, in the past 9 years alone, the investment in the fisheries sector has been 38,500 crores, and this has hugely benefited the fisheries ecosystem. Okay. Moving on to the next article. The next article talks about the wholesale price index, that is the WPI. The article is saying that the WPI continues to fall. So there is a deflationary trend in the wholesale price index. What is deflationary trend? That is, the rate of increase in inflation is very slow. Say for example, the WPI moved up sequentially for the second successive month, rising 0.33% in August compared with 2.01% in July. That is, the year-on-year growth of WPI compared to July of previous year was only 2.01%. And the year-on-year growth of WPI compared to August of last year was only 0.33%. This shows that the WPI year-on-year has marginally only increased. And when we compare July and August, the pace of increase has also reduced, because in July it increased only by 2.1%. In August, it was increasing only by 0.33%. So clearly we can see that the pace of the growth of WPI was also decreased, which means there is a deflationary trend. This is the definition of deflation. That is, the rate at which inflation increases is slowing down. That is deflation. Alright. So this is chiefly contributed because of the fall in prices of mineral oils, basic metals, chemicals, etc. See, here they have mentioned largely driven by fuel and power prices, whose year-over-year decline more than halved from minus 12.8% in July to minus 6% in August. So the WPI is mostly driven by wholesale items. So the reduction in price of mineral oils, basic metals, that has contributed to the deflationary trend in the WPI. Further, from prelims perspective, we will see what is the WPI, that is the wholesale price index, and it represents a basket of wholesale goods. So this wholesale price index focuses on the goods that are traded between corporations, that is what is sold from business to business, that is captured in the WPI. Whatever is sold from business to consumer, that is not captured in WPI. So it does not concentrate on the goods purchased by the consumers. Who publishes the WPI? It is the Office of Economic Advisor from the Ministry of Commerce and Industry. This office publishes the WPI. And what type of commodities are covered under the WPI? Manufacturing sector inputs, intermediary goods like minerals, machinery, basic metals, etc. These are all covered in the WPI. Basically, whatever are the input for manufacturing process, they are all covered in the WPI. And the base year for WPI is 2011-12. We'll move to the last article of the day. It is about raise in concern over a legal loophole with respect to sexual assault of animals. We are all aware that the IPC, that is the Indian Penal Code, is proposed to be replaced with the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita. And this bill is now at committee consideration stage. But why the concerns have risen in this respect is because there is no provision in the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita bill which punishes sexual abuse of animals. Earlier in the IPC, we had the section 377. This section 377 is a famous section, right? It criminalized gay sex. But this particular section, this part that criminalized gay sex, that was deleted by the Supreme Court. So currently, the section 377, it provides for punishment of those found engaging in bestiality. Bestiality is sexual abuse of animals. So whoever is voluntarily having a carnal intercourse against the order of nature with any animal, they will be punished with imprisonment for life or with imprisonment of either description for a term which may extend to 10 years and shall also be liable to fine. We have seen that there has been an increase in incidents of sexual abuse of animals. Recently, in the Indarpuri area of Delhi, a man was caught sexually abusing a female dog. So, in this respect, the up-and-coming Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita should also have a provision which criminalizes inhumane and cruel act of bestiality. So, that is the concern of animal activists. So, we'll now discuss previous year question. After the Santhal uprising subsided, what was or were the measure or measures taken by the colonial government? 1. The territories called Santhal Parganas were created. This is right. It became illegal for a Santhal to transfer land to a non-Santhal. So, this is to protect the tribal land. Both of these statements are correct. So the answer is C. Next question. Which of the following is not included in the assets of a commercial bank in India? A. Advances. B. Deposits. C. Investments. D. Money at call and short notice. Here the answer is B. Deposit, because deposit is not an asset. It is a liability, because the bank is liable to pay interest on deposit, whether it is a savings bank deposit, that is a demand deposit, or a fixed deposit, or a recurring deposit. The bank is liable to pay interest on that to the customers of the bank. Also, whenever the customer comes and they want to withdraw money from their bank account, the bank is liable to provide that money to the customer. Okay, so deposits are liability and they don't come under assets classification of banks in India. Okay, that's it for our discussion. Follow us on all the social media platforms. Thank you and all the best.